Chapter 1. Henry VIII is one of the most familiar names in British history. Even people who know very little about the past often recognize him immediately, the powerful Tudor king, famous for his 6 marriages, his bold decisions, his break from Rome, and the distinct image of a broad-shouldered monarch in luxurious clothing. Yet behind the famous paintings, the myths, and the popular stories lies a real man whose life shaped the political, religious, and cultural landscape of England in profound and lasting ways. Before exploring the striking events and dramatic changes of his reign, it is useful to step back and introduce the broader world into which Henry was born and the position he eventually inherited. Henry did not come into the world as a king in waiting. In fact, his early years were far quieter and less pressured than those of many royal children. Born in 1491, the second son of King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, he grew up in a household still settling into the newly founded Tudor dynasty. His father had claimed the throne only a few years before his birth, ending decades of civil turmoil known as the Wars of the Roses. This conflict between the houses of Lancaster and York had left England exhausted. With Henry VII's victory at the Battle of Bosworth and his strategic marriage to Elizabeth of York, the realm was finally beginning to stabilize. Into this recovering nation, the young Henry entered the world. The Tudor court of Henry's childhood was disciplined and cautious. His father was determined to secure the throne he had fought to gain. Every decision was made with care, every alliance calculated, and every expense considered. This environment shaped the young prince indirectly. As the second son, Henry was not expected to rule. That role belonged to Arthur, the older brother who was being prepared for kingship from infancy. Henry, by contrast, was allowed greater freedom to explore religious learning, languages, music, and physical training. He was intelligent, lively, and athletic, showing early signs of the energy that would one day define him as king. Yet while Henry enjoyed the benefits of royal life, the world around him was changing rapidly. England in the late 15th century was still a medieval country in many ways. Most people lived in rural communities, working the land and living in small villages with strong local identities. The church was central to the daily life of every citizen, and religious authority shaped education, law, and moral expectations. At the same time, Europe was moving toward new ideas and discoveries. The Renaissance was spreading from Italy into northern Europe, encouraging interest in classical learning, art, literature, and human potential. The printing press, introduced to England only a few decades earlier, was transforming how information circulated. Old ways and new ideas were beginning to meet. This was the world in which Henry was raised, a realm balancing tradition with the beginnings of change, a monarch establishing a new dynasty, and a society still anchored in medieval customs but slowly drifting toward a more modern age. These conditions influenced Henry enormously. The rich learning he received, the expectations of royalty, the cautious atmosphere of his father's court, and the religious framework of the time all formed the foundation of the personality that would later dominate the nation. However, it is important to remember that none of this immediately pointed toward Henry becoming king. Arthur, the firstborn son, was the center of attention. Henry was brought up with dignity and privilege, but with no direct pressure to prepare for the crown. He was expected to serve the kingdom in another way, perhaps through the church or through diplomatic and ceremonial duties. His education was carefully shaped to match this role. He learnt multiple languages, studied theology, practiced music, took part in hunting and riding, and developed a broad understanding of royal culture. These skills would later influence his reign in unexpected ways, giving him both the confidence and the curiosity that became central to his rule. The Tudor dynasty itself was still fragile. Henry VII worked tirelessly to repair the financial systems of the kingdom, restore order, and prevent rival claims from threatening the throne. Political stability depended on maintaining strong alliances across Europe, managing noble families with delicate precision, and ensuring that the young Tudor line produced heirs. The birth of Henry and his siblings helped strengthen the dynasty, presenting England with a growing family that symbolized peace after decades of war. In these early years, the young Henry grew into a thoughtful and observant child. His tutors noted his quick mind and natural enthusiasm for learning. He showed a particular interest in theology, philosophy, and classical authors, interests that would later influence his decisions as king, especially in matters related to religion and authority. His upbringing was a blend of humanist education and traditional royal training, giving him a unique perspective on power, culture, and faith. This introduction to Henry VIII is more than a glance at his early life. It is an entry point into understanding the forces that shaped one of England's most influential monarchs. His reign would bring extraordinary change, some planned, some unexpected, and some that would leave permanent marks on history. Yet at the beginning, before the marriages, before the political upheaval, before the religious transformation, he was simply the second son of a king determined to secure the future of a new dynasty. To appreciate Henry's impact fully, one must begin by recognizing the world he inherited: a nation recovering from civil war, a monarchy seeking legitimacy, and a young prince raised in the shadows of expectations that were not originally his. This quiet introduction allows us to see Henry not only as the powerful figure he later became, but as the child shaped by circumstance, education, and the shifting tides of English history. Chapter 2. Henry VIII's early years were shaped by the framework of the Tudor dynasty, an environment carefully constructed by his father, Henry VII, to ensure stability after decades of civil war. Born as the second son of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, Henry entered a world conscious of the fragility of dynastic succession and the importance of legitimacy. The union of his parents had ended the long-standing conflicts of the Wars of the Roses, producing a sense of unity that was carefully reinforced through ceremony, governance, and controlled public appearances. From the outset, Henry's life was structured around the expectations of royalty, even if his position as the younger son did not initially place him directly in line for kingship. As a child, Henry's upbringing was divided between structured education and supervised play, reflecting the dual aim of cultivating intelligence and instilling princely discipline. Tutors of the highest caliber were appointed to guide his learning. He was instructed in Latin and French, ensuring that he could communicate with scholars, clergy, and diplomats alike. Greek and classical literature were also included, offering lessons in history, philosophy, and ethical conduct. These subjects encouraged reflection and a sense of moral responsibility, elements that would later influence his approach to governance and religion. Beyond the academic, Henry received training in theology, with an emphasis on the doctrines of the Church of Rome. This education was designed not only to enhance his intellectual abilities but also to prepare him to understand and, if necessary, defend the religious and political structures that underpinned his future authority. Music, poetry, and the arts were integral to his education as well. Instruction in these areas cultivated refinement and cultural awareness, qualities expected of a prince. Henry was trained to perform in courtly ceremonies, participate in choral and instrumental music, and appreciate the visual and literary arts. Such training encouraged a balance between scholarly study and the performative aspects of royal life, preparing him to embody the ideal of the cultured Renaissance prince. His early exposure to the arts provided not only personal enjoyment but also a foundation for his later patronage and engagement with cultural matters during his reign. Physical training was a central component of his upbringing. From a young age, Henry practiced riding, fencing, archery, and other martial skills appropriate to a prince of his standing. Such training was intended to ensure that he would possess both strength and skill, qualities admired in a monarch and necessary for the ceremonial and practical duties of kingship. Exercise and outdoor activity were carefully balanced with study, creating a regimen that emphasized both mind and body. This duality reflected contemporary ideas about the ideal ruler, a combination of intellect, moral virtue, and physical capability. The early household of Henry VIII was also highly controlled, reflecting the cautious approach of Henry VII. Every aspect of life at court was observed and structured to reinforce the authority of the king and the hierarchy of the household. Meals, dress, etiquette, and attendance at religious services followed strict routines. The young Henry learned to navigate these structures from an early age, developing an awareness of courtly protocol, hierarchy, and the expectations placed upon a future ruler. This early immersion in ceremonial life instilled a sense of order and propriety, shaping his understanding of governance, social hierarchy, and public perception. Henry's relationship with his family influenced his development as well. He maintained close bonds with his mother, Elizabeth of York, whose presence provided stability and instruction in both moral and social conduct. Elizabeth's guidance emphasized the responsibilities of royalty, the importance of decorum, and the need to uphold the dignity of the Tudor name. Henry's father, Henry VII, exercised a more cautious and pragmatic influence, emphasizing prudence, financial management, and political awareness. Together, the guidance of his parents provided a balance between cultural refinement, moral education, and practical understanding of leadership. The unexpected death of Henry's elder brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales, in 1502 dramatically altered the young Henry's role within the royal family. The responsibilities and expectations once assigned to Arthur were gradually transferred to Henry, now heir to the throne. This transition occurred while he was still a child, requiring a rapid adjustment to new circumstances. Henry's education intensified to include training in law, governance, and diplomacy. Tutors ensured that he understood the structures of government, the administration of justice, and the principles of taxation and revenue management. Lessons in negotiation, ceremonial protocol, and the subtleties of courtly interaction prepared him to act as a representative of royal authority, even before he formally assumed the responsibilities of kingship. Despite these new expectations, Henry's early life retained elements of personal development and leisure. Music, hunting, games, and controlled outdoor activities provided outlets for physical and emotional growth. These experiences offered a balance between the discipline required of a future monarch and the natural development of childhood. The structured combination of intellectual, artistic, and physical training contributed to a well-rounded upbringing designed to produce a competent, capable, and cultured ruler. Henry's tutors also instilled the importance of history, precedent, and memory. He was encouraged to study the lives of previous English kings and European rulers, learning from their successes, failures, and decisions. This historical awareness provided context for his own future role, emphasizing the responsibilities of monarchy and the consequences of political action. Knowledge of historical events, combined with his academic training, prepared him to approach leadership with a combination of insight, awareness, and prudence. Religious instruction remained central throughout Henry's early years. The court was highly observant, and the young prince participated in daily religious practice. He learned the doctrines and rituals of the Church, gaining both theoretical knowledge and practical understanding of the spiritual life expected of a monarch. This grounding in faith would later influence his approach to governance and the complex religious challenges he would encounter. His early exposure to liturgy, scripture, and religious practice instilled habits of reflection, discipline, and moral consideration. The Tudor court provided opportunities for young Henry to observe political life without being fully responsible for it. He witnessed audiences, diplomatic negotiations, and ceremonial proceedings, all carefully supervised by his father. These observations allowed him to learn the nuances of leadership, the importance of alliances, and the intricacies of statecraft. Even in moments of leisure, the structure of the court reinforced lessons of duty, hierarchy, and public expectation. By the time Henry reached adolescence, the combination of education, physical training, observation, and familial guidance had established the foundations of his character. He was intellectually capable, physically strong, culturally aware, and increasingly conscious of his position within the monarchy. The events of his early years, including the unexpected elevation to heir, had instilled both ambition and awareness of the fragility of succession. Henry's life as a young prince demonstrates the careful cultivation of a ruler within a structured, controlled, and deliberate environment. This early period of Henry's life provides the essential context for understanding his later actions and decisions. The experiences of childhood and adolescence, marked by education, guidance, and observation, shaped his approach to monarchy, governance, and personal conduct. As a young prince, Henry absorbed lessons of prudence, culture, religious devotion, and political awareness that would inform his reign. The quiet, structured world of his early life forms the foundation for the extraordinary transformations, challenges, and developments that would follow once he became king. In this way, the early life of Henry VIII stands as a study in preparation, influence, and the careful shaping of a monarch whose reign would come to define an era in English history. Chapter 3. Henry VIII's transition from prince to monarch marked a significant moment in English history. The process of becoming king was neither sudden nor informal, but rather the culmination of carefully arranged succession practices, personal preparation, and the expectations of the Tudor dynasty. Understanding how Henry assumed the throne requires attention to the legal, familial, and societal structures that governed the monarchy at the beginning of the 16th century. The Tudor succession was based on clear hereditary principles. Henry's father, Henry VII, had secured the throne through his marriage to Elizabeth of York, uniting the houses of Lancaster and York after the Wars of the Roses. This union had created a line of descent designed to prevent future disputes over succession. Henry VIII, as the second son, was not originally expected to inherit the crown, but the death of his elder brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales, in 1502 altered the line of succession and placed him directly in the path to kingship. From that moment, Henry's life was oriented toward preparation for a role that would encompass all aspects of governance, diplomacy, and public responsibility. The final transition occurred following the death of Henry VII on 21 April 1509. At that moment, 17-year-old Henry officially became King of England. The legal recognition of his status was immediate, adhering to the established principle that the king is dead, long live the king. This principle ensured continuity in governance, with the crown transferring seamlessly from father to son, preventing any vacuum of authority. The coronation itself would occur later, but from the moment of his father's passing, Henry held all powers, privileges, and obligations of the monarchy. The immediate responsibilities of kingship encompassed multiple domains, from domestic administration to international diplomacy. Henry inherited a kingdom that, although stable compared to previous decades, required careful stewardship. Henry VII had established a system of financial management that included the careful assessment of royal revenue, strict control of expenditure, and efficient collection of taxes. This system ensured that the crown possessed the resources necessary to maintain governance, support military readiness, and project authority across the realm. Henry VIII assumed these responsibilities as part of the legal and practical transition from prince to monarch. In addition to financial oversight, the new king inherited administrative duties. The royal court, the council, and the various offices of state required direction and supervision. Henry was expected to understand the structures of governance, including the roles of advisors, ministers, and local officials. These roles had been demonstrated to him during his years as heir, but the full authority now rested with him. The young monarch needed to balance tradition, precedent, and innovation, making decisions that would affect all aspects of English life. The careful guidance he had received from tutors and advisors in law, diplomacy, and ceremonial practice provided a foundation for these responsibilities, although the practical realities of kingship demanded immediate adaptation. Henry's role as head of state also included religious leadership. At the beginning of his reign, the Church in England remained under the authority of the Pope in Rome. Henry had been educated in the doctrines and practices of the Church, and his early experience at court had emphasized the importance of religious observance. As king, he was expected to uphold religious institutions, maintain clerical appointments, and support the moral and spiritual well-being of the realm. This dual responsibility of political and religious authority underscored the breadth of duties that came with the crown, even for a young and relatively inexperienced monarch. Diplomatic responsibilities were equally significant. England's position within Europe required ongoing management of alliances, treaties, and relations with neighboring states. Henry VII had worked to secure peace and stability through careful marriages, treaties, and alliances, particularly with Spain and France. Henry VIII inherited both the obligations and opportunities of these agreements. His early role as king included engagement with ambassadors, negotiation of terms, and the maintenance of England's reputation abroad. The success of foreign policy depended not only on inherited agreements but also on the judgment and initiative of the new monarch. The personal transition from prince to king also carried social and ceremonial dimensions. Henry assumed new privileges and symbols of authority, including regalia, a personal seal, and the rights associated with the crown. Public perception of the monarch was critical. His appearance, conduct, and participation in court ceremonies communicated legitimacy and strength to both domestic and foreign audiences. Henry's upbringing had prepared him for these expectations. From his earliest years, he had observed formal ceremonies, learned the intricacies of courtly etiquette, and participated in events that reinforced his understanding of princely conduct. As king, he now embodied these ideals fully, representing continuity, authority, and the presence of the monarchy in every aspect of public life. The transition also required careful attention to succession and the continuation of the Tudor dynasty. The early death of his brother had underscored the fragility of succession, and Henry understood the importance of securing his own line. Although his immediate focus as king was the exercise of authority and governance, the continuation of the dynasty remained a central concern. This awareness influenced many aspects of decision-making, from marriage considerations to diplomatic alliances, emphasizing the interconnectedness of personal and political responsibilities. Henry's initial months as king were a period of adjustment, observation, and consolidation. He met with the council, reviewed financial records, attended formal ceremonies, and received reports on both domestic and international matters. Each of these activities served to establish his authority, demonstrate competence, and ensure that the machinery of governance continued without interruption. The young king's capacity to adapt quickly to these responsibilities was a testament to the thorough preparation he had received during his formative years. The coronation, which would later formally celebrate his kingship, was preceded by this practical assumption of power. The legal and functional transfer of authority was immediate, as required by the principles of succession. Henry's reign officially began on the day of his father's death, and from that moment, he held the full responsibilities, privileges, and expectations of the English crown. The transition from heir to king involved not only personal adjustment but also the management of a complex system of governance that had been carefully cultivated by his father. Understanding Henry VIII's ascension provides insight into the structured and deliberate nature of Tudor monarchy. His rise to power was not the result of chance or abrupt circumstance, it was the product of careful dynastic planning, legal principle, and the guidance he received throughout his early life. The young king assumed office within a kingdom that was stable yet full of expectation, equipped with the tools, education, and preparation required to exercise authority effectively. This moment marks the beginning of his reign, establishing the framework within which he would make decisions, enact policies, and shape the course of English history. Henry VIII's accession demonstrates the continuity of monarchy, the significance of preparation, and the weight of responsibility carried by a young ruler. It illustrates how the structures of government, the principles of succession, and the education of the heir all converge to create a seamless transition of power. The careful management of these elements ensured that England remained stable during this period of change, setting the stage for the developments, reforms, and challenges that would define the remainder of Henry's reign. Chapter 4. From the earliest days of his reign, Henry VIII understood that the stability of England depended upon the security of the Tudor dynasty. The experiences of his youth, particularly the death of his elder brother, Arthur, had underscored the fragility of succession and the importance of a clear line of inheritance. As king, Henry's attention was not only directed toward governance and administration but also toward the long-term preservation of the dynasty he now led. The continuity of the crown, the creation of legitimate heirs, and the establishment of enduring royal authority became central objectives of his reign from the outset. The Tudor dynasty had been established by Henry VII following the Wars of the Roses, a period marked by civil conflict and uncertainty over succession. His marriage to Elizabeth of York united two rival houses and produced the heirs necessary to secure dynastic continuity. Henry VIII inherited the benefits of this union but was also acutely aware of the responsibility it carried. The lessons of his father's careful consolidation of power informed his own approach. The monarchy's legitimacy depended upon heirs, alliances, and the careful management of both domestic and international relationships. Upon ascending the throne at the age of 17, Henry immediately recognized that producing an heir was not only a personal concern but also a matter of state. The survival of the dynasty required a male successor who could continue the Tudor line and prevent disputes over succession that had previously destabilized England. The young king's education, which included studies in law, governance, and theology, prepared him to understand both the legal and moral implications of succession. He was aware that his choices in marriage and progeny would influence the kingdom for generations, shaping political stability, international relations, and the enduring strength of the monarchy. Marriage played a central role in Henry's plans for dynastic security. As a monarch, he understood that the union of the crown with suitable partners could reinforce political alliances, strengthen claims to the throne, and produce legitimate heirs. His decision-making in selecting a queen was informed by careful consideration of dynastic, diplomatic, and legal factors. Marriage was not merely a personal arrangement, it was a strategic act designed to consolidate power, ensure legitimacy, and protect the continuity of the Tudor line. Henry's concerns for a strong dynasty also encompassed the health and survival of his future children. Observing the precariousness of early childhood mortality, he sought to ensure that any heirs were provided with careful nurturing, education, and protection from political and environmental dangers. This attention to the welfare of potential successors reflected an understanding that the dynasty's survival depended on both immediate offspring and long-term planning. The early death of his brother Arthur remained a constant reminder of the vulnerabilities inherent in succession and reinforced the importance of preparedness in all aspects of royal life. The king also recognized the necessity of reinforcing his authority through the broader network of nobility, clergy, and advisors. A strong dynasty relied not only on heirs, but also on a supportive political environment. Henry maintained relationships with influential families, cultivated loyalty among key officials, and ensured that the structures of government reinforced the legitimacy of the crown. These measures were integral to the preservation of the dynasty, providing both practical and symbolic support for the continuity of royal authority. Henry's approach to securing a strong dynasty extended to his understanding of legal frameworks and precedent. The English monarchy operated under laws of succession that required careful adherence to ensure legitimacy. Henry's early training in law and governance enabled him to navigate these rules effectively, planning marriages, alliances, and policies that would reinforce the dynastic line. He understood that the perception of legitimacy, as much as the reality, influenced the stability of the kingdom and the acceptance of his heirs by both the nobility and the people. Religious considerations were also intertwined with dynastic ambitions. The church played a central role in legitimizing royal authority, conducting marriages, and sanctioning the birth of heirs. Henry's education and early exposure to religious practice underscored the importance of church approval in matters of succession. The legitimacy of heirs, the formal recognition of marriage, and the moral authority of the monarchy all depended upon alignment with religious institutions. This connection between faith and dynasty reinforced the necessity of careful planning, legal compliance, and moral observance in ensuring the long-term strength of the Tudor line. Henry's hopes for a strong dynasty were shaped by both personal ambition and historical awareness. He studied the reigns of previous English kings, noting the consequences of weak succession, contested claims, and dynastic uncertainty. These examples informed his strategy, highlighting the importance of producing heirs, managing relationships with nobility, and maintaining the perception of stability. Henry's actions as king were guided by the understanding that the future of England depended not only on his own rule but also on the continuity of the dynasty he represented. Education and upbringing continued to influence his approach. The intellectual preparation he received as a prince provided him with the tools to consider succession systematically, balancing legal, religious, and political factors. The lessons learned from tutors, advisors, and careful observation of his father's reign contributed to a methodical approach to dynasty building, reinforcing the importance of planning, foresight, and prudence. Henry's early life had instilled in him both ambition and awareness of responsibility, shaping a monarch determined to secure the future of his family and his kingdom. In practical terms, this meant that Henry focused on producing a male heir capable of sustaining the Tudor line. He also sought to strengthen the monarchy through alliances and careful governance. The continuity of the dynasty was a central concern in all matters of state, influencing decisions related to law, diplomacy, domestic administration, and religious observance. Henry's reign would be defined, in part, by his ongoing attention to these objectives, reflecting a consistent focus on stability, legitimacy, and the enduring authority of the crown. Henry's hopes for a strong dynasty also extended to cultural and symbolic considerations. Ceremonies, public appearances, and rituals reinforced the perception of royal continuity. The monarchy's visibility, the projection of strength, and the careful management of public image contributed to the acceptance and recognition of the dynasty. Henry understood that a strong dynasty required both concrete measures, such as heirs and legal compliance, and intangible measures, such as public confidence, ceremonial display, and symbolic authority. This period of Henry's early reign illustrates the deliberate and measured nature of his approach to dynasty building. Every decision, from education and governance to marriage and succession planning, was informed by the overarching goal of securing the Tudor line. Henry's awareness of historical precedent, legal frameworks, religious sanction, and political alliances provided a comprehensive strategy for maintaining the dynasty's strength and continuity. Henry VIII's focus on establishing a strong dynasty underscores the interconnectedness of personal, political, and institutional responsibilities in the monarchy. His reign demonstrates that the preservation of the crown required careful planning, disciplined execution, and attention to both immediate and long-term considerations. By prioritizing the creation of legitimate heirs, reinforcing legal and religious structures, and cultivating loyalty among advisors and nobility, Henry sought to ensure that the Tudor dynasty would endure beyond his own lifetime. In summary, Henry's hopes for a strong dynasty were central to his vision of kingship. The early death of his brother, the careful preparation he received as a prince, and his understanding of the responsibilities of monarchy informed his actions as king. His focus on succession, marriage, alliances, legal authority, and religious sanction established a framework designed to secure the Tudor line and strengthen the monarchy. This measured and deliberate attention to dynasty laid the foundation for the enduring legacy of Henry VIII and shaped the trajectory of England's history for generations to come. Chapter 5. Henry VIII's first marriage was not merely a personal union, it represented a significant political and diplomatic alliance that had ramifications across Europe and within England. His bride, Catherine of Aragon, was the youngest surviving daughter of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, the Catholic monarchs of Spain. Her position as a Spanish princess made her a valuable political partner, linking England with one of the most powerful kingdoms on the continent. The marriage of Henry and Catherine exemplified the careful consideration of dynastic strategy and the pursuit of international alliances that characterized early Tudor diplomacy. The circumstances leading to the marriage were influenced by multiple factors. Catherine had initially been married to Henry's elder brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales. Their union was designed to cement Anglo-Spanish relations and reinforce alliances against France. Following Arthur's death in 1502, Catherine's position became uncertain. Henry VIII's accession created an opportunity to maintain this alliance, and the decision was made to marry the young king to Catherine, securing the political advantages of her connection to Spain. The process required papal approval, as the marriage would constitute a union with a brother's widow, necessitating a dispensation under church law. This step underscored the intersection of politics, religion, and dynastic considerations in the arrangement of royal marriages. The formal engagement was followed by careful preparation for the marriage ceremony. Catherine arrived in England in 1509, welcomed with considerable ceremony and public attention. Her arrival at court signified both a personal and political event, marking the beginning of her role as queen consort. Henry, 17 years old at the time, assumed responsibilities as both husband and king, aware of the expectations placed upon him in terms of governance, representation, and succession. The union was celebrated with a dignity and ceremony appropriate to a royal marriage, reinforcing both the legitimacy of the young king and the strength of the Tudor dynasty. Catherine of Aragon's personal qualities complemented the political purpose of the marriage. She was educated, devout, and well-versed in the languages and culture of the European courts. Her upbringing in the Spanish court had instilled an understanding of diplomacy, protocol, and the responsibilities of royalty. These qualities made her a suitable partner for the young king, capable of fulfilling the ceremonial, social, and dynastic roles expected of a queen consort. Her knowledge of politics, religion, and courtly etiquette contributed to the smooth integration into the English court and supported the broader objectives of the Tudor monarchy. The early years of the marriage were characterized by stability and cooperation. Henry and Catherine undertook the ceremonial, political, and social duties expected of their positions. Catherine participated in religious observances, courtly functions, and diplomatic receptions, fulfilling her role as queen consort while also acting as a symbol of continuity and alliance. Henry's approach to kingship during this period was influenced by his desire to establish authority, consolidate the monarchy, and secure the dynasty through the production of heirs. The marriage provided the framework within which these objectives could be pursued. The couple's relationship, while primarily structured around dynastic and political considerations, also reflected mutual respect and compatibility in the early years. Catherine's experience in the Spanish court and Henry's education in governance and culture allowed both to navigate the responsibilities of royalty with awareness and diligence. Their interactions were informed by shared recognition of duty, the importance of ceremony, and the expectations of the English people. The marriage thus functioned both as a personal union and a mechanism for reinforcing political stability and dynastic continuity. Producing an heir was a central concern during this period. The union between Henry and Catherine represented not only the continuation of the Tudor line but also the consolidation of a political alliance with Spain. The young king and queen approached this responsibility with the awareness that the future of the monarchy depended upon legitimate offspring. Catherine's health, upbringing, and experience contributed to the careful planning of succession, while Henry's attentiveness to dynastic imperatives underscored the practical considerations inherent in early Tudor kingship. Religion played a significant role in the early marriage. Both Henry and Catherine adhered to the doctrines and practices of the Catholic Church, which legitimized their union and sanctioned the production of heirs. Daily religious observance, participation in Mass, and attention to moral duties reinforced the sacred nature of the marriage and aligned it with contemporary expectations of monarchy. The early years of the marriage, therefore, were guided by a combination of personal devotion, ceremonial obligation, and dynastic responsibility. The union was further reinforced by ceremonial and symbolic acts that projected stability and legitimacy. Public appearances, formal court events, and diplomatic receptions highlighted the marriage's significance both domestically and internationally. The careful management of these activities strengthened perceptions of the monarchy and ensured that the alliance with Spain remained visible and respected by other European powers. Henry's role as king, alongside Catherine's as queen, was thereby supported by carefully orchestrated ceremonial practices that reinforced their authority and the continuity of the Tudor dynasty. Despite the pressures inherent in their roles, the early period of Henry and Catherine's marriage was relatively peaceful and characterized by mutual cooperation. Their shared focus on duty, governance, and dynastic imperatives allowed them to navigate the complexities of court life with measured attention and careful planning. The union exemplified the strategic, diplomatic, and ceremonial functions of royal marriage in the early 16th century, providing both stability and a framework for succession. In the broader context of European politics, the marriage strengthened England's position. The alliance with Spain offered both security and influence, connecting the Tudor monarchy with one of the continent's most powerful kingdoms. The early years of the marriage thus represented both domestic consolidation and international diplomacy, reflecting the multifaceted responsibilities of Henry and Catherine as king and queen. In summary, Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon established a foundation for dynastic stability, political alliance, and ceremonial legitimacy. The early years of their union were peaceful, structured, and marked by cooperation, reflecting the careful planning that underpinned Tudor rule. Catherine's qualities as a queen consort, Henry's understanding of kingship, and the political importance of the marriage combined to produce a period characterized by relative calm, effective governance, and attention to the long-term security of the dynasty. This period laid the groundwork for the challenges, developments, and historical significance that would emerge in the subsequent years of Henry's reign. Chapter 6. From the very beginning of his reign, Henry VIII understood that the security of the Tudor dynasty depended upon producing a legitimate male heir. The early years of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon were guided not only by political alliance and ceremonial duties but also by the pressing responsibility of ensuring succession. The king's focus on this objective shaped domestic policy, royal planning, and the personal life of both himself and his queen. The marriage between Henry and Catherine had been arranged with the clear understanding that it would secure the dynasty and strengthen the political alliance between England and Spain. Beyond the diplomatic implications, the production of heirs was a matter of paramount importance. The English monarchy, like other European dynasties, relied upon a male successor to continue the line, maintain legitimacy, and prevent disputes over the throne. From the outset, Henry was acutely aware of this obligation and the expectations of the nobility, clergy, and people of England. Catherine of Aragon approached her role with the knowledge and experience necessary for producing heirs. Her upbringing in the Spanish court had included instruction in courtly duty, religious observance, and the responsibilities of queenship. She understood the significance of childbirth in the context of dynastic continuity and the practical challenges of producing a male heir. Catherine's early years in England were therefore shaped by both ceremonial participation and preparation for motherhood, a central component of her role as queen. The initial pregnancies of Catherine were closely observed by the court and the king. Every pregnancy was considered a matter of national importance, reflecting the political, religious, and social significance of succession. In each case, Henry and his advisers understood that the survival of the child, particularly a son, would determine the stability of the monarchy and the continuation of the Tudor line. The Queen's health, diet, and medical care were carefully managed to ensure the best possible outcomes, guided by the knowledge and practices of the early 16th century. The birth of Henry's first child, a daughter named Mary, in 1510, brought both joy and concern to the monarchy. While Mary's arrival was celebrated as the production of a legitimate heir, the absence of a male child left the question of dynastic continuity unresolved. The birth highlighted the limitations of medical knowledge at the time and the inherent unpredictability of childbirth. Nevertheless, Mary's legitimacy as the daughter of the king and queen strengthened the dynasty and ensured that the line of succession was clear, even if incomplete in terms of gender expectations. The subsequent years of Catherine's pregnancies were marked by repeated efforts to produce a male heir. Several pregnancies ended in stillbirth or the early death of the child, reflecting both the challenges of reproductive health in the period and the immense pressure placed upon the queen. Each miscarriage or loss was experienced not only personally but also politically, as it influenced perceptions of the stability of the monarchy and the potential continuity of the Tudor dynasty. The king's concern for the production of a male heir intensified, guiding decisions about marriage, succession planning, and domestic policy. Henry's focus on producing an heir influenced his approach to governance. The continuity of the dynasty shaped domestic priorities, including the management of finances, administration, and courtly relations. Advisers and officials were acutely aware that succession was the central concern of the king, and their recommendations often reflected this priority. The interconnectedness of family, politics, and statecraft meant that the struggle for an heir was never merely personal, it was a matter of national significance, affecting alliances, religious observance, and the perception of stability both within England and across Europe. Religious and ceremonial practices reinforced the importance of childbirth and succession. The Church sanctioned marriages, legitimized heirs, and provided guidance in matters of moral and spiritual duty. Daily prayers, Mass, and ritual observance were integral to the process, reflecting contemporary belief in divine influence over the health of the Queen and the survival of offspring. Both Henry and Catherine participated in these practices, acknowledging the spiritual dimension of succession and the broader societal expectations of monarchy. The birth of Mary also had implications for the broader diplomatic and political landscape. As the daughter of the king and queen, Mary represented both legitimacy and continuity, serving as a symbol of the dynasty's endurance. Her position in the line of succession was clear, providing reassurance to allies and domestic observers alike. Nevertheless, the absence of a male heir continued to weigh upon the monarchy, highlighting the ongoing struggle to secure the Tudor line fully and the significance attributed to male succession in early 16th century England. The personal dimension of the struggle for an heir was intertwined with political considerations. Henry's concern for dynastic continuity influenced his attitudes toward marriage, family, and succession, guiding decisions that extended beyond his immediate household. The pressures of kingship, combined with the expectations of courtly and religious structures, created a context in which the birth of children was both a personal and public matter. Each pregnancy, miscarriage, and birth had implications for the stability, legitimacy, and perception of the monarchy. Throughout this period, Catherine demonstrated resilience and adherence to her role as queen. She navigated the challenges of repeated pregnancies, public scrutiny, and the immense responsibility placed upon her with dedication and composure. Her experience underscores the centrality of the Queen's position in the Tudor monarchy, not only as a partner to the king but also as a vital agent in ensuring dynastic continuity and political stability. The early years of Henry's reign, therefore, were shaped not only by governance and diplomacy but also by the central concern of producing heirs and securing the dynasty. Henry VIII's early struggle for a male heir illustrates the interconnection of personal ambition, dynastic necessity, and state responsibility. The successes and setbacks experienced during this period were instrumental in shaping the priorities and policies of his reign. The production of Mary, while a significant achievement, underscored the ongoing urgency of securing a male successor, reflecting both societal expectations and political imperatives. This period laid the foundation for later developments in succession, marriage, and religious policy, demonstrating the enduring importance of family and progeny in the life of the Tudor monarchy. In summary, the early years of Henry and Catherine's marriage were defined by the struggle to secure the Tudor dynasty through the birth of heirs. The birth of Mary, alongside subsequent miscarriages, highlighted both the personal and political dimensions of succession. Henry's attention to dynastic continuity influenced governance, diplomacy, and ceremonial practice, reinforcing the centrality of heirs to the stability of the kingdom. Catherine's role as queen, her experience, and her resilience were integral to this process, providing a foundation for the monarchy's enduring authority and the continuation of the Tudor line. Chapter 7. Henry VIII's concern for a male heir, coupled with his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, ultimately laid the foundation for one of the most significant religious and political transformations in English history, the break with Rome. This period was characterized by careful legal, theological, and diplomatic maneuvering, as Henry sought a solution to the succession problem while remaining within the bounds of church law. The events of these years demonstrate the complexity of the intersection between personal ambition, dynastic necessity, and the religious authority of the papacy. By the mid-1520s, Henry and Catherine's marriage had produced only one surviving child, Mary, despite numerous pregnancies that ended in miscarriage or stillbirth. The absence of a male heir created both personal and political concern. For Henry, the lack of a son threatened the stability of the Tudor dynasty, leaving open the possibility of disputed succession in the future. His position as monarch required foresight and planning. The security of the realm was intertwined with the question of legitimate male succession. As such, Henry's concerns were not merely private but central to the governance and continuity of the English crown. From the beginning of his reign, Henry had been a devout supporter of the Catholic Church. He was educated in theology, aware of doctrine, and had even earned recognition from the Pope for his published works defending the faith. His reputation as a staunch Catholic was well established, and he initially sought solutions within the existing ecclesiastical structure. The king's legal advisors and theologians were consulted to determine the possibilities for ensuring dynastic security without contravening church law. In this context, the marriage to Catherine was evaluated not only as a dynastic alliance but also in light of scriptural and canonical guidance. Henry and his advisors examined questions regarding the validity of his marriage to Catherine. The papal dispensation that allowed Henry to marry his brother's widow had been granted decades earlier, legitimizing the union under canon law. Nevertheless, as years passed without the birth of a male heir, doubts arose regarding the legitimacy of the marriage in the eyes of divine will. Advisors and theologians debated whether the lack of a son signified a flaw in the marriage, citing interpretations of biblical texts, historical precedent, and the principles of morality. The king's concern for the continuity of the dynasty thus began to intersect with theological debate, creating tension between personal ambition and established church authority. Diplomacy also played a role in the unfolding situation. Henry was aware of the political ramifications of any action regarding his marriage. Catherine's position as a Spanish princess meant that any attempt to alter the marital arrangement could affect relations with Spain, one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe. Henry's approach required careful negotiation, balancing domestic priorities, international alliances, and the prerogatives of the papacy. The interconnection of marriage, succession, and foreign policy illustrates the complex environment in which Henry's decisions unfolded. Henry initiated a series of inquiries and discussions regarding the possibility of an annulment. These discussions were conducted discreetly at first, reflecting the sensitivity of the situation and the potential consequences of challenging church authority. Advisors examined canon law, consulted theologians, and reviewed precedents for annulment, seeking a path that would preserve legitimacy while addressing the king's dynastic concerns. The legal and theological complexity of these inquiries underscored the unprecedented nature of the challenge. Henry sought a solution that would secure the Tudor line while remaining faithful to the authority of the Church. The personal dimension of the situation added further urgency. Henry's desire for a male heir was deeply intertwined with his identity as king and his understanding of royal duty. Producing a legitimate son was not merely a matter of personal preference, it was a legal, political, and dynastic necessity. The pressure of expectation from the nobility, advisors, and the broader public reinforced the importance of a resolution. The king's determination to find a lawful and acceptable solution reflects both his commitment to the Tudor dynasty and the weight of responsibility he felt as the monarch of England. The early stages of what would become the break with Rome were characterized by incremental steps, careful consultation, and attempts to work within established structures. Henry explored legal avenues, engaged in dialogue with theologians, and sought counsel from trusted advisors. These initial steps illustrate the measured and deliberate approach he took, seeking legitimacy and consensus even as the urgency of producing a male heir increased. At this stage, there was no open conflict with the papacy. The king's actions were cautious, designed to respect authority while addressing pressing dynastic concerns. As discussions continued, the limitations of papal authority in resolving Henry's specific situation became apparent. The complexity of international politics, the personal stakes for the monarch, and the legal framework of canon law combined to create a situation in which traditional channels could not provide a satisfactory solution. The king's growing awareness of these limitations marked the beginning of a shift in thinking, as he began to consider alternatives that would allow him to secure the succession while maintaining authority and legitimacy. These considerations set the stage for the constitutional, religious, and political transformations that would follow. The tension between dynastic necessity and religious authority was further heightened by public expectation. The people of England, the nobility, and the clergy all observed the royal household closely. Success in producing an heir was essential for the continuity of governance and for the perception of stability. The pressure on Henry to act decisively was immense, shaping his consultations, legal inquiries, and eventual strategy. The early years of this process reveal the careful balance of personal ambition, dynastic obligation, and adherence to established authority that characterized the king's approach. By the mid-1520s, Henry's concern for a male heir and the limitations of existing ecclesiastical solutions had begun to point toward a more profound transformation of church-state relations. While open separation from Rome would take years to formalize, the initial steps in questioning the validity of his marriage, consulting theologians, and asserting the necessity of papal action laid the groundwork for what would become the English Reformation. These early actions were deliberate, methodical, and grounded in both legal reasoning and dynastic concern, demonstrating the king's careful management of a situation that had far-reaching implications for the kingdom. In summary, the beginnings of the break with Rome were closely tied to Henry VIII's urgent concern for a male heir and the limitations of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Legal inquiry, theological consultation, and diplomatic consideration defined this period, illustrating the intersection of personal, dynastic, and religious responsibility. The steps taken during these years were measured, cautious, and deliberate, marking the start of a process that would eventually reshape the English monarchy, the church, and the governance of the realm. Henry's determination to secure the Tudor dynasty set the stage for constitutional and religious change, establishing the context for one of the most significant transformations in English history. Chapter 8. The arrival of Anne Boleyn at the English court introduced a new and complex dimension to Henry VIII's reign. Anne, the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, a prominent diplomat and courtier, and Lady Elizabeth Howard, was well-educated, charismatic, and connected to powerful families within England and across Europe. Her presence at court coincided with Henry's continued concern for a male heir and the limitations of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, creating conditions that would dramatically alter the political, dynastic, and religious landscape of the kingdom. Anne's early years at the English court were marked by careful observation, education, and participation in the ceremonial life of the monarchy. She had previously spent time in the courts of the Netherlands and France, gaining experience in diplomacy, etiquette, and courtly culture. This background equipped her to navigate the intricacies of the English court, where alliances, reputation, and perception played critical roles. Her intelligence, charm, and assertiveness distinguished her from others in the royal household and attracted the attention of Henry VIII, who was increasingly dissatisfied with the absence of a male heir. Henry's interest in Anne Boleyn was influenced both by personal attraction and by the pressing dynastic imperative of securing a male successor. Unlike his relationship with Catherine of Aragon, which had been arranged for diplomatic and political reasons, Henry's growing fascination with Anne was intertwined with the practical necessity of producing an heir. The king's attention to Anne coincided with legal and theological consultations regarding the possibility of annulling his marriage to Catherine, setting the stage for an unprecedented constitutional and religious transformation. The relationship between Henry and Anne quickly became a central concern of the royal court. Courtiers, advisors, and members of the nobility were acutely aware of the king's interest, understanding the potential implications for succession, international alliances, and domestic stability. The situation required careful management. Any perception of impropriety, favoritism, or political imbalance could destabilize the delicate structures of Tudor governance. Anne, aware of her position and the consequences of her influence, navigated these circumstances with a combination of discretion, intelligence, and political acumen. Anne Boleyn's refusal to become Henry's mistress, insisting instead on marriage, added complexity to the situation. This insistence challenged established norms and expectations within the court, as royal liaisons were often arranged to secure favor or influence without requiring formal marriage. Anne's stance strengthened her negotiating position, reinforcing her political leverage and creating an environment in which the king's options were constrained. The insistence on marriage aligned with both Anne's personal convictions and the strategic considerations of securing legitimate offspring for the Tudor dynasty. The desire to marry Anne directly conflicted with the ongoing marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Henry's continued preoccupation with the absence of a male heir, combined with Anne's resistance to an extramarital relationship, prompted the king to intensify efforts to obtain an annulment. Legal inquiries, theological consultation, and diplomatic negotiation became increasingly urgent, highlighting the intersection of personal ambition, dynastic necessity, and religious authority. The court, aware of the stakes, monitored developments closely, understanding that the outcome would influence the legitimacy of succession, the perception of royal authority, and the alignment of international alliances. The potential annulment of Henry's marriage to Catherine represented an unprecedented challenge to church authority. The dispensation originally granted by the Pope to allow the marriage had been considered binding, and questioning its validity required both careful legal reasoning and theological justification. Henry consulted advisors, theologians, and canon lawyers, examining scriptural interpretations and historical precedents to support his case. These deliberations reflected the careful, deliberate approach taken by the king, who sought to reconcile personal and dynastic objectives with the established authority of the Church. The political dimension of Henry's relationship with Anne Boleyn extended beyond domestic concerns. European powers observed developments at the English court with interest, recognizing that any change in marriage or succession could affect alliances, diplomatic negotiations, and the balance of power. Catherine of Aragon's position as a Spanish princess added further complexity, as her familial connections to Ferdinand and Isabella, and subsequently to Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, created international stakes. Henry's court navigated these considerations with attention to both diplomacy and domestic stability. Anne's influence over the king also reshaped court politics. Her family, particularly Thomas Boleyn, gained prominence, securing positions of authority and reinforcing their role within the Tudor court. Courtiers and advisors aligned with Anne's factions sought to influence policy, diplomacy, and succession planning, reflecting the interconnectedness of personal relationships and governance. The emergence of the Boleyn influence exemplifies the way individual relationships could impact political structures and the distribution of power within the monarchy. The societal and ceremonial implications of Henry's attachment to Anne were equally significant. Public perception of the monarchy, the symbolism of royal behavior, and the observation of protocol all contributed to the perception of legitimacy and authority. The king's interest in Anne was manifested not only in private consultation but also in public appearances, court ceremonies, and the orchestration of events that reinforced the seriousness of the proposed union. These displays underscored both the personal and political importance of the king's relationship and its implications for the continuity of the Tudor dynasty. Henry's pursuit of marriage to Anne Boleyn accelerated the processes that would ultimately lead to the break with Rome. The inability to obtain an immediate annulment through traditional channels, combined with Anne's insistence on marriage and the dynastic imperative for a male heir, created a situation in which alternative legal and religious mechanisms were explored. These steps, taken deliberately and cautiously, set the stage for the establishment of new ecclesiastical structures within England, allowing the king to assert authority over matters previously reserved to the papacy. In summary, the relationship between Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn represented a turning point in the Tudor monarchy. It combined personal desire, dynastic necessity, and political calculation, creating conditions that challenged existing legal and religious norms. Anne's influence, Henry's pursuit of a male heir, and the complexities of international diplomacy produced significant upheaval within the court and the broader kingdom. The early stages of this period illustrate the careful management of personal, political, and religious responsibilities, highlighting the factors that ultimately led to profound transformation in English governance and ecclesiastical authority. Chapter 9. The personal and dynastic concerns that had occupied Henry VIII's mind for years culminated in a profound transformation of the English religious landscape. By the mid-1530s, the question of a male heir, combined with Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn, had reached a point at which the traditional authority of the Pope could no longer satisfy the king's objectives. The resulting changes would permanently alter the governance of the Church in England, assert royal supremacy, and redefine the relationship between monarchy and religion. The legal foundation for this transformation was laid through a series of statutes passed by the English Parliament. Central among these was the Act of Supremacy of 1534, which declared that the king was the only supreme head on earth of the Church of England. This legislation formally severed papal authority over ecclesiastical matters in England and recognized the king as the ultimate legal and spiritual authority in the realm. The Act of Supremacy represented both a consolidation of power and a necessary legal framework to legitimize Henry's annulment from Catherine of Aragon and his marriage to Anne Boleyn. Before this formal declaration, Henry had already undertaken several measures to limit papal influence. The submission of the clergy, achieved through the Act of Submission of the Clergy in 1532, required bishops and clergy to acknowledge the king's authority over church laws and decisions. This law effectively placed English religious governance under royal control, limiting appeals to Rome and ensuring that major decisions concerning doctrine, appointments, and property fell within the purview of the Crown. The submission of the clergy laid the groundwork for the broader reforms of the Church that would follow. The legal separation from Rome was reinforced through careful legislative work and parliamentary procedure. Henry's advisers, including Thomas Cromwell, orchestrated a sequence of measures that gradually established royal supremacy. Statutes relating to ecclesiastical taxation, the appointment of bishops, and the management of church property strengthened the king's control while ensuring that reforms were grounded in law rather than personal decree. These measures reflected a strategic, methodical approach to transforming religious governance while maintaining social and political stability. The transformation of the English Church also required changes in religious personnel and administration. The king asserted authority over clerical appointments, replacing those who opposed reform with loyal supporters. Bishops, abbots, and other church officials were expected to swear allegiance to the crown and acknowledge the supremacy of the king in spiritual matters. These reforms ensured that ecclesiastical power was aligned with royal authority and that the church could no longer act independently of the state. The redistribution of authority fundamentally altered the balance of power between monarchy and clergy in England. An important component of the transformation was the eventual dissolution of monasteries, which occurred over the following decade. While the dissolution of the monasteries peaked in the mid-1530s, the legal and institutional groundwork was established during this period. Monastic lands, wealth, and influence were brought under royal control, further consolidating Henry's power. The dissolution had multiple effects. It weakened potential centers of opposition, increased the crown's revenue, and reinforced the perception of the king as the supreme authority in both temporal and spiritual matters. The marriage to Anne Boleyn was closely tied to these reforms. By establishing himself as the supreme head of the church, Henry could validate his marriage to Anne and the legitimacy of their children without reliance on papal approval. This legal and religious authority resolved the dynastic crisis that had driven much of the early tension between Henry and the papacy. It also demonstrated the interconnection of personal, dynastic, and religious imperatives in shaping historical transformation. Religious doctrine remained largely intact during the early stages of the Church's transformation. While royal supremacy changed governance and authority, the liturgy, sacraments, and theological positions initially continued to reflect traditional Catholic practice. The early Reformation in England was therefore more constitutional and administrative than doctrinal, focusing on who held authority rather than changing beliefs. Henry's primary concern was the legitimacy of succession, and the transformation of church governance was instrumental in achieving this goal. The broader political implications of these reforms were significant. By severing papal authority, Henry positioned England as a sovereign religious state, independent of external ecclesiastical influence. This assertion of autonomy affected foreign relations, particularly with Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, whose monarchs remained staunchly Catholic. Domestically, the reforms strengthened royal control, reduced the power of potentially rival institutions, and reinforced the legitimacy of Henry's decisions regarding marriage, succession, and governance. The English Church's transformation also required public engagement and propaganda to secure acceptance. Royal proclamations, ceremonies, and formal oaths were used to communicate the new authority of the king. Clergy and nobility were expected to swear allegiance to Henry's supremacy, reinforcing compliance across social and institutional hierarchies. These measures ensured that the population gradually adapted to the new ecclesiastical order and that dissent could be addressed within the legal framework established by Parliament. Over time, the establishment of royal supremacy laid the foundation for further religious reform and conflict in England. While the immediate purpose was to resolve the dynastic crisis and legitimize Henry's marriage to Anne, the long-term consequences reshaped the relationship between church, state, and society. The king's assertion of authority over religious matters marked a defining moment in English history, establishing a precedent for monarchic control that would influence subsequent generations. In summary, the transformation of the English Church under Henry VIII was a deliberate, legally grounded, and politically motivated process. Through parliamentary acts, the submission of the clergy, and the assertion of royal authority, Henry established himself as the supreme head of the Church of England, severing papal influence and securing the legitimacy of his marriage to Anne Boleyn. These measures consolidated power, ensured the continuity of the Tudor dynasty, and redefined the governance of religion in England. The legal and institutional changes of this period were foundational, demonstrating the interconnection of personal ambition, dynastic necessity, and constitutional reform in shaping one of the most significant transformations in English history. Chapter 10. Henry VIII's reign was marked by continual efforts to secure political, dynastic, and religious stability for England. By the time the English Church had been formally reshaped under royal authority, Henry faced the ongoing challenge of ensuring that these sweeping changes would create lasting order rather than deeper uncertainty. His quest for stability was not a single event but a gradual process that unfolded over many years, influenced by shifting alliances, evolving domestic expectations, and the persistent question of succession. The need for a stable dynasty remained a defining concern. Although Henry had achieved the authority to determine his marital future by separating from Rome, the broader objective of securing the Tudor line remained unresolved. His marriage to Anne Boleyn had produced a daughter, Elizabeth, in 1533, but the long-desired male heir continued to elude him. The birth of Elizabeth was celebrated, yet it did not fully answer the dynastic question. England's political structure depended on clarity of succession, and the presence of only one surviving legitimate daughter left considerable uncertainty. Henry's awareness of the fragility of dynastic security shaped many of his decisions during this period. The Tudor family had come to power in the aftermath of the Wars of the Roses, a prolonged and violent conflict over competing claims to the throne. Although Henry's father, Henry VII, had established the Tudor dynasty with careful governance and strategic marriage alliances, memories of instability lingered. The possibility of disputed succession remained a genuine concern for both the king and his advisors. Ensuring a smooth transition of power required not only a legitimate heir but also a stable political environment in which loyalty to the crown could be maintained. The transformation of the Church also introduced new uncertainties. While the assertion of royal supremacy strengthened Henry's immediate authority, it also created potential sources of resistance. Not all clerics, nobles, or commoners accepted the changes willingly. The sudden shift from centuries of papal authority to a national church under the king's leadership required firm and consistent management. Henry's quest for stability therefore included maintaining unity within the population and ensuring that challenges to his authority could be addressed effectively within the legal framework he had created. Efforts to secure stability were reflected in Henry's pursuit of loyalty through legislation and policy. Oaths acknowledging the king's supremacy and the legitimacy of his marriage were required from clergy, nobility, and officials. These oaths served both as declarations of loyalty and as tools to identify potential opposition. Those who refused to swear allegiance were subject to penalties, imprisonment, or worse, depending on the perceived threat to national unity. By enforcing these measures, Henry aimed to ensure that the new religious settlement would be accepted across all levels of society. Diplomacy also played a role in Henry's pursuit of stability. The break with Rome altered England's position within Europe, creating tension with Catholic monarchs who remained loyal to the Pope. Relations with Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and other European powers became more complicated as Henry's actions challenged traditional religious alliances. Diplomatic efforts were required to manage these new realities, maintain trade, and prevent foreign interference in domestic affairs. Henry's government sought to balance firmness with flexibility, avoiding conflict while asserting England's independence in matters of governance and religion. Domestic administration was similarly shaped by the goal of long-term stability. Henry strengthened the role of Parliament during this period, using it to pass the legislation that formalized the Church's transformation and reinforced royal authority. This increased reliance on parliamentary procedure helped to ensure that reforms were accepted as lawful and legitimate. The king's use of Parliament also created a precedent for broader participation in major transformations, reinforcing the idea that national unity depended on legal consensus rather than unilateral decree. The economic implications of Henry's reforms were another factor in his quest for stability. The redistribution of monastic wealth and land following the suppression of religious houses had significant consequences for the economy and social structure of the kingdom. As monastic lands were transferred to the crown and later granted to nobles and gentry, new patterns of land ownership emerged. This redistribution strengthened Henry's political position by rewarding loyal supporters, but it also required careful management to avoid disruption to local communities. Ensuring economic stability was therefore intertwined with the process of religious and political change. Henry's personal relationships further influenced his pursuit of stability. His marriage to Anne Boleyn, which had been a catalyst for so much change, became increasingly strained as the years passed without a male heir. The political pressure to secure the succession placed strain on the relationship, and court factions formed around competing views of the king's future. These factions attempted to influence policy, succession planning, and royal appointments, creating an environment in which stability required the careful navigation of shifting loyalties and competing ambitions. The broader governmental structure also required reinforcement. Henry relied heavily on trusted ministers to implement reforms and maintain order. Figures such as Thomas Cromwell played essential roles in drafting legislation, managing administrative changes, and overseeing the enforcement of royal authority. The relationship between the king and his advisors was a crucial factor in achieving stability, as effective governance depended on both trust and competence. Cromwell's influence during this period contributed significantly to the organization and execution of the king's policies. Continued religious reforms added another layer of complexity. While doctrinal change was gradual, the redefinition of church governance required clarity and consistency. Henry's government issued proclamations and instructions to ensure that clergy and laity understood the new expectations. Teaching, preaching, and administration were closely monitored to maintain uniformity. These efforts aimed to prevent confusion or dissent that could undermine stability, reinforcing the king's position as the primary source of religious authority. Henry's foreign policy also adapted to the new realities created by religious transformation. England sought strategic alliances that would support its independence from papal authority, while avoiding unnecessary conflict with more powerful nations. Diplomatic missions, treaties, and negotiations were shaped by the need to protect English interests and maintain peace. Stability required a careful balance between asserting sovereignty and managing relations with influential Catholic states who might view England's actions with concern. By the late 1530s, Henry's quest for stability had become an effort to solidify the changes he had initiated and ensure their endurance beyond his reign. The establishment of royal supremacy, the redistribution of ecclesiastical wealth, and the reinforcement of legal authority all contributed to the creation of a new political and religious order. However, the ongoing lack of a male heir continued to cast uncertainty over the future. Henry's determination to address this issue influenced his decisions about marriage, governance, and policy, demonstrating how closely personal concerns and national stability were intertwined. In summary, Henry VIII's quest for stability involved a complex combination of dynastic, political, religious, and diplomatic efforts. His need for a secure succession drove many of the major transformations of his reign, while his determination to reinforce royal authority shaped the legal and administrative structures of England. Through careful legislation, enforced loyalty, diplomatic negotiation, and institutional reform, Henry worked to ensure that the changes he introduced would create lasting order. His quest for stability was both a response to immediate challenges and a vision for the long-term future of the Tudor dynasty and the English realm. Chapter 11. Jane Seymour brought a rare moment of steadiness into the turbulent world of Henry VIII, marking a brief but important chapter in his reign. Her arrival as queen came at a time when Henry's court had been shaken by years of controversy, his relationship with the church had been transformed, and the political climate had become tense and unpredictable. Against this backdrop, Jane's quiet nature, modest behavior, and strong sense of order offered the king something he had not experienced for many years: a sense of calm. Jane was born around 1508 into a respected but not politically dominant noble family. The Seymours were loyal servants to the crown, known for their disciplined household and adherence to traditional values. Jane herself received an education suitable for a woman of her rank, focusing on domestic management, piety, and the practical skills expected of a noblewoman. Her upbringing shaped her personality, forming a woman who valued structure, obedience, and stability. These characteristics later became key reasons Henry found comfort in her presence. Her path to becoming queen began when she entered the service of Queen Catherine of Aragon and later Anne Boleyn. In both households, she was considered a quiet and dependable attendant. Jane did not seek attention, nor did she involve herself in the political disputes that often surrounded the Tudor court. Throughout the conflicts that arose during Henry's marriages to Catherine and Anne, she remained largely in the background, noted mainly for her modesty and calm manner. This made her stand out in a court increasingly defined by ambition, tension, and instability. By the time Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn began to break down, Jane had come to represent the opposite of Anne's bold and outspoken presence. To Henry, weary of political arguments and personal frustration, Jane seemed to embody peace, order, and a more traditional model of queenship. After Anne's arrest and execution in 1536, Jane was formally acknowledged as queen. Her coronation was postponed, however, partly due to lingering unrest and partly because Henry wished to wait for a more stable moment to celebrate a new beginning. As queen, Jane Seymour approached her role with seriousness and dignity. She adopted a conservative interpretation of queenship, following the example set by Catherine of Aragon rather than the more reform-oriented court culture that had developed during Anne Boleyn's time. Her influence was subtle but significant. She worked to restore a sense of traditional order in the royal household, emphasizing decorum, respect, and restraint. Her presence helped reduce tensions within the court and allowed Henry to present an image of renewed stability to the kingdom. One of Jane's most notable early achievements was her role in reconciling Henry with his daughter Mary. Mary had been declared illegitimate and removed from the succession during the conflicts between Henry and Catherine of Aragon. The emotional distance between father and daughter had troubled many observers, and Jane sympathized with Mary's situation. Though she had limited political authority, Jane used her influence carefully to encourage Henry to mend this relationship. Her efforts were successful. Mary was eventually restored to favor, although not yet to full legitimacy. This was an important step in healing divisions within the royal family. Jane also took a conservative stance toward religious reform. Unlike Anne Boleyn, she did not actively support the more radical Protestant movements growing within England. Jane favored a return to certain traditional practices and expressed concern over the social and economic consequences of the break with Rome. Although she was unable to reverse the changes already set in motion, her views provided Henry with a different perspective and temporarily slowed the pace of further religious upheaval. Despite her gentle influence, Jane did not escape the political pressures of queenship. The Pilgrimage of Grace, a large rebellion in the north of England triggered partly by dissatisfaction with religious reforms and the dissolution of monasteries, broke out in 1536. Jane reportedly pleaded with Henry to show mercy and to consider the concerns of his subjects. Henry refused, asserting royal authority and rejecting any suggestion of softening his policies. After this, Jane rarely attempted to intervene directly in matters of state, understanding the limits of her influence. Jane's most significant contribution to the Tudor dynasty came through her pregnancy in 1537. After years of disappointment and failed attempts to produce a surviving male heir, Henry viewed Jane's pregnancy with immense hope. The entire kingdom shared this anticipation, as the question of succession had caused uncertainty for decades. Jane withdrew from many of her public duties during this time, focusing on her health and following the strict customs associated with royal maternity. In October of 1537, Jane gave birth to Edward, the long-awaited male heir. Henry regarded this as the fulfillment of his greatest political and personal ambition. The birth brought a wave of celebration throughout England, marking what appeared to be the achievement of lasting dynastic security. Jane, who had accomplished what neither Catherine nor Anne could, was praised as the ideal Tudor queen. However, the brief calm she brought to the kingdom ended soon after Edward's birth. Jane fell ill, likely from complications related to childbirth. Despite efforts to treat her condition, she died only days later. Henry mourned her deeply, claiming she had been his true wife because she had given him the son he long desired. Whether this reflected personal affection, political convenience, or a mixture of both, Jane's death left a noticeable void. Her gentle influence had offered Henry a period of rare stability during a volatile time in his reign. In the years that followed, Henry continued to honor Jane's memory. She remained the only one of his wives to be buried beside him, a decision that reinforced her lasting significance in his life and legacy. Her brief reign, though quiet and relatively short, marked a turning point in the Tudor dynasty. Through her personality, her approach to queenship, and above all her role as the mother of the future King Edward, Jane Seymour secured a distinct place in Tudor history. Her time as queen demonstrated how a calm presence could reshape not the policies of a nation, but the atmosphere within its most powerful household. In a court defined by upheaval, conflict, and rapid change, Jane's measured and steady nature allowed Henry to experience a moment of peace. Although her life was short, her impact on the Tudor succession and the emotional landscape of Henry's reign was considerable. Jane Seymour's legacy is therefore remembered not for dramatic events or controversial decisions, but for the stability, dignity, and quiet strength she brought during one of the most transformative periods in English history. Chapter 12. The period following Jane Seymour's death marked a new phase in the reign of Henry VIII, defined by shifting political priorities, diplomatic necessities, and the evolving needs of the Tudor dynasty. With the birth of Edward securing a male heir for the first time, Henry's view of marriage changed. He no longer sought a wife primarily for succession, but for political stability, diplomatic advantage, and personal companionship. Yet each of Henry's later marriages came with its own challenges, creating a sequence of changing winds that shaped the final years of his rule. After Jane's death in 1537, Henry grieved deeply, but the expectations of kingship meant that he could not remain unmarried for long. England's diplomatic position had become increasingly isolated after the break with Rome, and European politics were shifting rapidly. Protestant and Catholic powers maneuvered for influence, and alliances had to be carefully chosen. Marriage once again became a political tool, even though Henry already had the long-awaited heir. The search for a new queen led Henry into negotiations with various European courts. His advisors, particularly Thomas Cromwell, encouraged him to consider a match that would strengthen ties with Protestant states. England's religious stance was still developing, and forming alliances with reformist regions of Germany seemed both practical and strategic. After reviewing diplomatic portraits and receiving favorable reports, Henry agreed to marry Anne of Cleves. Anne arrived in England in 1539, but the union quickly proved unsuitable from Henry's perspective. Although the political motivation behind the marriage was sound, Henry found that he and Anne lacked the personal compatibility he expected. He considered her manner unaligned with his preferences, and the cultural differences between them became apparent almost immediately. The marriage was never fully established, and within months, discussions began about how it might be ended without causing diplomatic harm. By July of 1540, the marriage was annulled on the grounds of non-consummation and lack of mutual agreement. Anne accepted the decision and was treated with notable generosity. Henry granted her a substantial estate and the honorary title of the king's beloved sister. Her cooperation ensured that England avoided conflict with Cleves, and Anne remained in England for the rest of her life, maintaining a cordial relationship with the court. The failure of this political marriage created an opening for another shift in Henry's personal life. Just weeks after the annulment, he married Catherine Howard, a young noblewoman from the powerful Howard family. Catherine's youth, vitality, and charm provided a stark contrast to the strained Cleves marriage, and Henry was immediately captivated by her. His advancing age and declining health made him especially drawn to her lively nature, and he hoped the marriage would bring renewed happiness. Catherine's role as queen, however, revealed the tensions and vulnerabilities of Henry's later years. Her lack of political experience and the influence of factions within the Howard family created instability at court. Moreover, accusations of Catherine's previous and current indiscretions soon reached the king. An investigation confirmed that she had not lived up to the strict expectations placed on a queen consort, and her downfall was rapid. In 1542, Catherine was executed for treason, and Henry experienced another personal and political blow. The turbulent end to Catherine's queenship marked a turning point. Henry's health continued to decline, and his outlook became increasingly cautious. His next marriage, to Catherine Parr in 1543, showed a clear change in his priorities. Catherine Parr was a mature, educated widow who understood the complexities of royal life. She brought stability, organizational skill, and a calming influence to Henry's household. Her intelligence and diplomatic skill allowed her to manage the competing religious views at court while maintaining the king's favor. Catherine Parr's influence extended beyond her role as wife. She played a significant part in reconciling Henry with his daughters, Mary and Elizabeth. By encouraging their return to court and supporting legislation that restored them to the line of succession, she contributed to the unity of the Tudor family. This was a valuable achievement, especially as Henry approached the final years of his reign. Catherine also acted as regent when Henry traveled to France, demonstrating administrative capability and gaining respect from both nobles and foreign observers. The later years of Henry's reign were marked by continued changes in religious policy. Although he remained committed to the structure of the Church of England and the principle of royal supremacy, he resisted the more radical theological reforms promoted by some factions at court. Catherine Parr held reformist views, but she had to balance them carefully. At one point, opponents attempted to turn Henry against her by suggesting she was promoting forbidden religious ideas. Catherine, aware of the dangers, reassured Henry of her loyalty and avoided a confrontation. Her ability to navigate these challenges helped preserve stability during a politically sensitive time. As Henry aged, the shifting winds of his marriages reflected the broader changes taking place within the kingdom. His relationship with Anne of Cleves demonstrated the role of diplomacy in royal marriage. His union with Catherine Howard revealed the vulnerability of a king increasingly reliant on youthful companionship yet exposed to courtly intrigue. His marriage to Catherine Parr showed the need for reassurance, management, and family unity during a time of declining strength. Henry's health grew steadily worse in the final years of his life. Obesity, leg ulcers, and other ailments limited his mobility and affected his mood. He relied heavily on advisors and on Catherine Parr's organizational abilities, yet he continued to assert his authority where possible. His foreign policy shifted between campaigns, negotiations, and efforts to maintain England's position in Europe. Domestically, he worked to secure Edward's succession and ensure that the realm would remain stable after his death. By the time Henry died in 1547, he had been married 6 times. His later marriages reflected not only personal desires but also the changing political landscape of England. Each queen contributed in different ways to the stability or instability of the court. Anne of Cleves strengthened diplomacy, Catherine Howard exposed the dangers of factional competition, and Catherine Parr brought intellectual companionship and family unity. The winds of Henry's later reign were shaped by shifting alliances, personal hopes, health challenges, and the ongoing need to secure England's future. Through these final marriages, Henry's rule entered a new phase, one defined not by the aggressive pursuit of change but by the effort to manage the consequences of the transformations he had already set in motion. His queens became symbols of the political, religious, and personal shifts that characterized the last decade of his life. Their influence, whether lasting or brief, helped shape the closing years of a reign that had reshaped England more profoundly than any monarch before him. Chapter 13. The later years of Henry VIII's reign were shaped by an intense focus on consolidating wealth, projecting royal authority, and crafting an unmistakable Tudor image that would outlast his own lifetime. This period reflected both the success and the strain of the king's earlier decisions. Henry had reshaped England through religious change, political centralization, and the creation of a new concept of monarchy. Now he sought to reinforce that power, secure the kingdom's finances, and project an identity that would confirm the legitimacy and strength of the Tudor dynasty. The accumulation of wealth had been a goal since the earliest years of Henry's rule, but it took on new urgency after the break with Rome. The dissolution of the monasteries, which unfolded under Henry's authority in the late 1530s, yielded immense material gain. Monastic lands, buildings, goods, and precious metals were seized by the crown, dramatically increasing royal income. The scale of this transfer of wealth was unprecedented in English history. Some of the assets were used to bolster the royal treasury, others were granted to nobles in exchange for loyalty, thereby strengthening Henry's political alliances. This redistribution of wealth helped Henry reinforce his position at a time when religious changes had generated uncertainty and resistance. Yet the sudden influx of resources also came with responsibilities. Maintaining properties, organizing sales, and managing newly acquired lands created administrative challenges. The Crown introduced new financial departments to cope with the management of revenues from dissolved monastic properties. Although the reforms were not perfect, they contributed to a more centralized form of governance and expanded the reach of royal authority. Henry's emphasis on wealth was not limited to land and goods. He also used economic power to shape the social landscape of England. By rewarding supporters with land from former monastic estates, he created a class of landowners whose loyalty was tied directly to the crown. These men, often ambitious and eager to rise within the Tudor order, formed a new political foundation. Their dependence on the king's favor helped Henry maintain control during periods of unrest, particularly after rebellions such as the Pilgrimage of Grace. In this way, wealth became a tool of political strategy. The projection of power was equally important during this stage of Henry's reign. His identity as a strong, commanding monarch was central to the Tudor vision of kingship. Henry understood that authority required visibility. Portraiture became an essential medium for reinforcing his status. He commissioned works that portrayed him as a dominant, imposing figure, standing broad-shouldered and confident, with symbols of monarchy unmistakably displayed. These images were not simply representations, they were statements of royal ideology. They presented Henry as the embodiment of national strength and as a ruler who commanded respect. One of the most influential contributors to this visual identity was Hans Holbein the Younger, whose portraits of Henry became iconic representations of Tudor power. Holbein's work emphasized symmetry, richness of clothing, and the physical magnitude of the king. Even as Henry's health declined, the imagery projected vigor, authority, and indomitable presence. The portraits were meant to be seen by ambassadors, nobles, and courtiers, reinforcing the message that the king remained the unquestioned center of English political life. Architecture was another medium through which Henry expressed authority and shaped the Tudor image. The expansion of palaces such as Hampton Court and Whitehall demonstrated a desire for grandeur and royal magnificence. These buildings were not only residences but symbols of the monarchy's strength and wealth. Their halls, galleries, and chambers reflected shifting tastes, incorporating both medieval traditions and early Renaissance influences. Visitors to the court encountered a physical environment designed to impress, intimidate, and convey the stability of Tudor rule. Beyond visual imagery, Henry cultivated an ideological form of kingship that emphasized sovereignty. The break with Rome had placed the king at the head of the Church of England, granting him spiritual as well as temporal authority. This reinforced his image as a ruler whose power was divinely sanctioned. Laws such as the Act of Supremacy formalized this role, while subsequent legislation ensured that loyalty to the king replaced older allegiances to ecclesiastical structures. The consolidation of both religious and political power further strengthened Henry's ability to shape the national identity. The use of propaganda became increasingly sophisticated during this period. Printed materials, proclamations, and official statements promoted Henry's achievements, justified his decisions, and defended the legitimacy of the new religious order. These tools helped counter criticism and present the crown as the guiding force in England's transformation. Even when policies generated tension, the narrative promoted by the state emphasized unity, progress, and the protection of the realm under Henry's leadership. Military ambition also played a role in Henry's projection of power. Although his campaigns were inconsistent in their success, they contributed to a sense of national pride. Conflicts with Scotland and France, including the capture of Boulogne in 1544, allowed Henry to portray himself as a warrior king, continuing the legacy of his father's dynastic struggles and earlier English monarchs. Victory was celebrated, and defeats were reframed to maintain the appearance of royal competence. Even as Henry aged and became increasingly limited by health problems, he maintained the identity of a determined military leader. However, the pursuit of wealth and power came with considerable costs. The expenses of war, court life, and large-scale building projects strained the treasury. Despite the vast gains from monastic dissolution, funds dwindled more quickly than expected. Inflation rose, partly due to Henry's decision to debase the coinage, reducing the silver content in coins while maintaining their nominal value. This provided short-term financial relief but contributed to long-term economic instability. The growing financial pressures reflected the difficulty of sustaining Henry's ambitious vision. The Tudor image Henry crafted relied on control, magnificence, and an unmistakable demonstration of authority. But beneath the surface, tensions persisted. Religious uncertainties continued to divide the population. Nobles and courtiers maneuvered for influence, forming factions that competed for the king's favor. Henry's health problems, including severe leg ulcers and obesity, affected his ability to govern directly. Yet the image produced through portraiture, ceremony, and propaganda obscured these weaknesses. Henry ensured that the public saw not a declining monarch but a symbol of strength. Despite the challenges, Henry succeeded in shaping a new model of English monarchy. He created a centralized state with greater administrative reach than any previous ruler. Wealth taken from the church empowered the crown and reduced the influence of competing power structures. The Tudor image became synonymous with authority, grandeur, and national identity. This image would influence the reigns of his children, helping solidify the dynasty's place in English history. Henry's efforts to control how he was perceived extended into his family legacy. He sought to secure the succession not only through heirs but through symbolism and continuity. Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth each inherited aspects of the Tudor image shaped during their father's reign. The emphasis on strong central authority, national unity, and royal magnificence would continue to define the Tudor period long after Henry's death. In the final assessment, the wealth Henry accumulated, the power he exercised, and the carefully constructed Tudor image he promoted worked together to cement his position in history. These elements were intertwined: wealth enabled displays of power, power reinforced the monarchy's authority, and the visual and ideological Tudor image strengthened public perception. The combination created a lasting legacy that shaped both the end of Henry's reign and the decades that followed. Chapter 14. Henry VIII's final years marked the closing act of one of the most eventful, influential, and turbulent reigns in English history. By the early 1540s, he was no longer the charismatic, athletic young king who had dazzled Europe in his youth. He had become an aging monarch burdened by declining health, political pressures, and the consequences of decades of dramatic transformation across his kingdom. Yet even in physical deterioration, Henry continued to command extraordinary authority, and the decisions he made in these concluding years shaped the Tudor state long after his death. Physically, Henry was suffering considerably. The leg injury he received earlier in life, compounded by repeated ulcerations, had never healed properly. By his later years it had become a chronic, painful wound that limited his ability to move and contributed to significant weight gain. His once active lifestyle was long gone, replaced by difficulty walking and reliance on mechanical devices to assist him. Many accounts from the time indicate that he experienced notable mobility issues, and this undoubtedly influenced both his mood and the way he managed his court. His declining health also fostered an increased preoccupation with succession and stability, which became central themes during his final years. Despite his condition, Henry remained deeply involved in governance. He continued to oversee military campaigns, foreign policy decisions, and ecclesiastical matters. His ambitions extended into foreign conflicts, particularly renewed tensions with France and Scotland. The final decade of his reign saw considerable investment in coastal defences, shipbuilding, and the development of England's naval capabilities. His dedication to military security revealed a king still committed to projecting authority beyond his borders, even when his body could no longer support active participation. Relations with Scotland reached a crucial point during this period. Following the death of James V of Scotland in 1542, Henry attempted to secure dominance through the proposed marriage of his young son, Prince Edward, to the infant Mary, Queen of Scots. This effort to unite the kingdoms under Tudor influence resulted in a series of conflicts known as the Rough Wooing. Although ultimately unsuccessful, the campaign demonstrated Henry's persistent desire for strategic control and dynastic expansion, even as his reign neared its end. Domestically, Henry's religious settlement remained an ongoing concern. After breaking with Rome and establishing himself as the supreme head of the Church of England, Henry maintained a delicate balance between traditional religious practices and the newer Protestant influences. In his later years, this balancing act intensified. The king continued to navigate between factions at court that favored stronger reforms and those who preferred a more conservative religious structure. His decisions during this time did not create a fixed doctrine but instead left behind a church that reflected elements of both continuity and change. These unresolved tensions would later challenge his successors, who each faced the task of shaping England's religious identity. One of the most influential developments in Henry's final period was the increasing dominance of court factions. Because of his declining health, Henry was less able to participate personally in all political dealings, and powerful individuals around him gained tremendous influence. Councillors, nobles, and family alliances all sought royal favor and control, shaping policy and directing the kingdom's future. Rival groups within the court often competed fiercely, and Henry's unpredictable favor could shift rapidly. Those who succeeded in maintaining his trust at this stage could dramatically influence national affairs, while those who fell out of favor faced swift punishment. The king's marriage to Catherine Parr, his sixth and final wife, played an important role during these years. Catherine was known for her intelligence, calm temperament, and practical approach to royal responsibilities. She helped reconcile Henry with his daughters Mary and Elizabeth, both of whom had experienced periods of exclusion from the line of succession. Catherine also acted as regent during Henry's military campaign in France, demonstrating her capability and the trust Henry placed in her. Her companionship offered stability and order at a time when Henry's personal and political life was otherwise dominated by uncertainty and factional rivalry. Henry's later years also saw significant developments regarding the royal succession. Concerned with securing the Tudor line and ensuring political continuity, he passed the Third Succession Act in 1543. This legislation confirmed that Prince Edward would inherit the throne, but it also restored Mary and Elizabeth to the line of succession should Edward die without heirs. Although their legitimacy was not fully reinstated, the act ensured that the Tudor dynasty would continue even if complications arose after Henry's death. This decision ultimately shaped the course of English history, as both Mary and Elizabeth would go on to rule, each leaving distinct and lasting marks upon the nation. As Henry's health further declined, his concerns increasingly focused on legacy. He aimed to strengthen the monarchy, preserve the gains made during his reign, and ensure that his son would inherit a secure and well-governed kingdom. Henry did not live to see the long-term consequences of the religious and political transformations he initiated, but his actions during these final years reflected a desire to cement the Tudor dynasty's authority and stability. Henry VIII died on the 28th of January 1547 at the age of 55. His final moments were marked by the solemnity expected of a reigning monarch whose life had reshaped a nation. After more than 3 decades on the throne, he left behind a kingdom profoundly altered by his decisions. England's relationship with the Church had been transformed, the power of the monarchy strengthened, and its international position significantly shifted. The effects of his rule would continue through the reigns of his children and throughout the broader narrative of English history. In his final years, Henry was a ruler shaped by ambition, determination, and the realities of aging. His reign closed not with the triumphs of his youth but with the weight of responsibility, legacy, and the lasting impact of choices that had redefined England. This period was one of reflection, consolidation, and preparation for the uncertain future that awaited the Tudor dynasty. Despite the physical decline he experienced, Henry remained a formidable presence until the end, a king whose final years were as consequential as any that preceded them. Chapter 15. Henry VIII's reign was one of the most transformative periods in English history, leaving a legacy that extended far beyond his own lifetime. As we look back upon his accomplishments, challenges, and decisions, it becomes clear that his impact was multifaceted, touching religion, politics, culture, and the very identity of the English monarchy. A careful reflection on his legacy reveals both the enduring strengths he established and the complexities he left for his successors. One of Henry's most enduring legacies was the establishment of the Church of England and the assertion of royal supremacy over religious matters. By breaking with Rome, Henry fundamentally altered the structure of religious authority in England. He placed himself at the head of the Church, granting the monarchy unprecedented influence over ecclesiastical appointments, doctrine, and administration. This act not only strengthened the power of the crown but also set a precedent for the relationship between religion and state in England. While later generations would continue to debate the precise nature of this authority, Henry's decision laid the foundation for the religious landscape of the nation for centuries to come. The redistribution of monastic wealth and property during his reign had profound social, economic, and political consequences. By transferring enormous resources from the church to the crown and the nobility, Henry reshaped social hierarchy, rewarding loyalty and consolidating political alliances. New landowners emerged who owed their status directly to the king, strengthening the central authority of the monarchy and creating a more tightly controlled political network. This transformation altered the economic fabric of England, creating opportunities for some and challenges for others, and it demonstrated Henry's understanding of wealth as a tool of governance. Henry's dynastic concerns also left a lasting mark. The search for a male heir drove many of his marriages and personal decisions, reflecting the broader importance of succession in maintaining political stability. The birth of Edward, alongside the eventual restoration of Mary and Elizabeth to the succession line, ensured that the Tudor dynasty would endure beyond Henry's death. His careful legal arrangements, including the Third Succession Act, highlighted the foresight he exercised in protecting the continuity of the monarchy. In this way, Henry's personal ambitions became intertwined with the long-term security of the kingdom. Culturally, Henry VIII promoted a vision of monarchy that combines splendor, authority, and national identity. The arts, architecture, and portraiture flourished under his reign, and the Tudor image he cultivated projected strength and stability. The commissioning of magnificent palaces, tapestries, and paintings reinforced his authority while leaving a visual and symbolic legacy that continues to influence perceptions of the Tudor period. His portrayal in contemporary and later artwork emphasized power, dignity, and dominance, providing both a record of his reign and a lasting representation of kingship. Henry's foreign policy, though marked by mixed results, also contributed to his legacy. He pursued alliances, marriages, and military campaigns aimed at strengthening England's position in Europe. While not all of these efforts succeeded, they reflected an active engagement with continental politics and a determination to assert England's influence. The construction of coastal defences, the expansion of the navy, and campaigns in France and Scotland demonstrated his commitment to national security and showcased a vision of England as a sovereign and strategically aware nation. At the same time, Henry's reign introduced considerable challenges that would shape the experiences of his children and successors. The legal and religious reforms he implemented were profound, but they left unresolved tensions. The interplay of Catholic and Protestant beliefs, along with the memory of multiple controversial marriages and executions, created an environment in which his heirs would need to navigate both the expectations of legitimacy and the demands of governance. In this sense, Henry's legacy is one of both consolidation and complexity, providing the tools for stability while leaving questions that required careful management. Perhaps most significantly, Henry's personal qualities, ambition, decisiveness, and a relentless drive to shape events according to his will, became inseparable from his historical legacy. He was a monarch who demanded attention, whose presence and authority dominated the court, and whose actions reshaped every aspect of English political and religious life. His achievements were inseparable from his character, his determination to secure an heir, his willingness to challenge centuries-old religious structures, and his capacity to wield wealth and power to achieve his goals all reflect the profound influence of personal agency in history. Henry's impact on England was also social and symbolic. The crown emerged from his reign more powerful, centralized, and visible than it had been under any previous English monarch. Nobles and citizens alike were reminded of the authority of the king through ceremony, legislation, and the enforcement of loyalty. His reign demonstrated that monarchy could serve as both a stabilizing and transformative force, capable of shaping the nation's identity and future. The consequences of his decisions extended well beyond the immediacy of his own rule, influencing the reigns of Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, and contributing to the enduring prominence of the Tudor dynasty. Reflecting on Henry VIII's life, it is clear that his reign was defined by both extraordinary achievement and profound challenge. He achieved a transformation of church, state, and dynasty that few monarchs could have envisioned. He strengthened the monarchy, secured a male heir, and created a visual and political legacy that endured beyond his lifetime. At the same time, the intensity of his reforms, the volatility of his marriages, and the societal disruptions his policies caused serve as reminders that great change often carries costs and complications. Ultimately, Henry's legacy is inseparable from the period he shaped. He embodies the power, ambition, and complexity of Tudor England. His reign offers a study in the possibilities and limits of monarchy, illustrating how personal determination can influence national history. Through his successes and failures, England emerged from the early 16th century transformed, politically, religiously, economically, and culturally, a nation stronger, more centralized, and more distinctly Tudor. A gentle reflection on Henry VIII reminds us that history is neither simple nor singular. The king's life, with its triumphs and trials, demonstrates the interconnectedness of personal ambition, political strategy, and national destiny. His legacy, firmly imprinted on England, continues to invite study, reflection, and understanding. It is a legacy that balances both achievement and caution, ambition and consequence, a fitting conclusion to the reign of one of history's most remarkable and influential monarchs.